Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar session. We are here to talk about biodiversity net gains and rewards and their requirements and the implementation and the opportunities. So welcome today. We'll start by just to clarify that everybody's on mute within the webinar, but if you'd like to ask any questions, please do so in the chat function and we will answer them at the end. So to give you an introduction into who we are 8 associates. And if you don't know us already, you haven't worked with us yet, we are a sustainability consultancy and we have multidisciplinary expertise. So we work in the following areas. We love to help organisations deliver on the sustainability goals, and we work with corporate organisations to help that happen. So right through from a net zero strategy, right through to working in the built environment, which many of you might have worked with us in the past. So we are work on solely on sustainability, and we're well versed at providing sustainability statements and sustainability requirements at planning stages. So as you know, the net zero carbon agenda is large at the moment, and we're working on some corporate footprinting projects and also some offsetting portfolio projects, which is really exciting at the moment. Never before has it been a better time for assurance and certification, and we have a large team working on environmental assessment, another verification and international third-party standards. So we've been established for 14 years and we've worked on thousands of sustainability projects across those different remits. So 8 associates, Chris and I are the directors, and we, as I mentioned, we're a multidisciplinary team, which means we've got a range of experts across from different industries. We've got sustainability consultants here, ecologists and arborists, carbon specialists, and as you can read from the list there, we've got our team are really great with different backgrounds. They may be engineers or architects or even software developers. So we have a full range of experts here, which makes working on projects together actually really interesting and insightful. To give you an overview of today's programme, so we're going to talk about biodiversity net gain. We'll give a brief overview of the planning policy and the legislation, and then we'll go into more detail on the biodiversity metric. So we'll provide a bit more information there on how you actually measure it, how what information you need, how you achieve it, and provide some case studies. And then we'll talk a bit about optimisations and opportunities, and just a brief look at the future on what biodiversity metrics look like for the future. So I'll talk about biodiversity net gain. What is it? It's an approach to development that aims to leave a natural environment in a measurably better state than it was beforehand. And that's the key here. It's measurably better. We'll talk about the details in the next few slides, but biodiversity net gain really looks at the pre-development pre-development sites, so what's existing, and then what's planned for post-development. So it takes into account the retained habitat, what can be enhanced, what may be lost, and what will be created. So it's the Environment Act that necessitates biodiversity net gain, and here are the key components. The Environment Act is the government's 25-year plan. It received royal assent back in November 2021, and we're working in a 2-year implementation period. So we expect this to be happening around winter 2023 when we know more details. We're currently in the second stage of this consultation, and we'll know more about certain aspects in the second stage. So here are the key components. We know that it's part of the amended Town and Country Planning Act. There is a mandatory requirement for a 10% net gain calculated using the metric, and this also includes a biodiversity gain plan. Any requirements are required to be secured for at least 30 years via planning and via a planning obligation, and that's got to be monitored also. And this can be delivered either on site, so within your red line boundary, off site via an alternative area or a new statutory biodiversity credit scheme. There's going to be in the future, there's going to be a national register for these biodiversity net gain delivery sites, and we'll know more about that into the future when we are in this next phase of consultation. So just to briefly recap, we've always had a gain for biodiversity within the NPPF, as many of you will know. Here, I think the key is that there's a measurable net gain that's required, and now with the addition of the Environment Act, that we'll be looking towards working towards a 10% net gain. So that's the key change. This obviously filters down to local policy. We know that each local planning authority has its own policy regarding nature conservation and biodiversity, and depending on what stage the local policy is at, some may just require currently that there is a gain for biodiversity and not actually suggest that there's a 10% gain there at the moment. We know that local planning authorities set their strategies for biodiversity net gain because that may link to their own priorities currently. So it could be their own local nature recovery strategies within the area, and that can target sort of off-site delivery and off-site gain for biodiversity that will contribute to the wider nature recovery plans. We're finding at the minute actually that lots of local planning authorities are already implementing the 10%, and occasionally there's a few that are asking for more within the local policies, and they want to future-proof that so that, you know, as the Environment Act is finalised, that they're already ahead, and our clients are keen to do this as well. We know they want to future-proof, so they're achieving 10% already. And here in this slide, there's just some examples of the Westminster City Plan and the South Cambridgeshire Plan and their requirements currently. So just to clarify that the designations don't change, we're still required to look at our habitat designations and think about protected species licenses, and the mitigation hierarchy still underpins all that we do. So we're still working to get involved at early stages to avoid any possible harm, to mitigate and to compensate. So this is planning policy for best practice, and this is what should be followed in this order. And obviously this aims to ensure conservation, restoration and enhancement priorities take place, and the ecological networks and protection is considered within this process. So I'll now hand over to our principal ecologist here at 8 Associates, Sarah Curtis, and she'll discuss the biodiversity net gain metric in more detail.
Cool, thanks Stacey. So the biodiversity metric overview, so we're just going to talk about how it works and what it means for developments. So the metric's been developed by Natural England, and it's a way that we can measure biodiversity net gain. It's been designed to provide ecologists, developers, planners, other parties with means of addressing the change in the biodiversity value. So that's your losses and gains on the site that are brought about by development or change in the land management. Some developments will be exempt from BNG, but that's currently, they're kind of getting guidance, Natural England sending out guidance on which ones. So that will be in the next round of biodiversity consultation, but likely household applications will be one of those. So the metric provides a distinctiveness and condition to each habitat type, and it gives it a value. The values are then added together, and it calculates your loss pre-development or what's on site basically beforehand. We then insert our created habitats into that metric, so looking at landscape plans and what's being proposed on sites. We usually start with on site, and that then gives us our post-development value. For that, we also need the distinctiveness and condition of habitats, which we use as a bit of an assumption at that stage. We've got there's Natural England produced a kind of a metric, which is like an Excel sheet that you kind of put in all the figures. and it's used to determine these habitat values. It kind of works it out, which is great. There's part of it that needs a condition assessment. So each habitat pre-development has to kind of be assessed for its condition, and that needs to be done by an ecologist or a suitably qualified person. But you need to, there's a lot of things that you do need to know, including what plants are there, the condition of it, like from ground level upwards. And that basically runs through like a pass or fail criteria, which is great. If the habitats on site have been cleared or degraded, then the metric needs to take into consideration the site before clearance or the degradation of that habitat. That's looking at aerial images usually, or past ecology reports. It's not best practice, and it's usually then assumed that it's worst case scenario, and the habitats are sometimes put as better than maybe they were, so your metric will show that basically. The metric does also take into consideration the risk of delays to the creation and enhancement of habitats. So where a habitat is being lost and new habitats being created to replace it, it's more costly in terms of biodiversity units than the enhancements. So as we said on the last slide, it's better to avoid those impacts straight away, because you get your higher scores for that. So avoid that habitat if you can, especially the more higher ecological valuable ones. Irreplaceable habitats such as ancient woodlands are exempt from the mandatory net gain, and that's in line with the Environment Act. And at the minute, Natural England is currently developing new guidance on this. There's a certain bit in the metric, so you do your habitats as area based, and then you've got linear features which include hedgerows and watercourses, and they are assessed separately within the metric. And that also means that each of those needs to achieve a 10% net gain. The metric does not take into consideration other ecological enhancements, such as bat and bird boxes, but instead it uses habitats such as species need, so those species need to forage or complete with their life cycle. So yeah, if we put bat boxes up on trees, it won't count. But if we plant native species planting that's ecological valuable, it's got lots of pollen or nectar sources, or foraging for birds, then that all helps with the metric. These features are still, so they should still be included, and that's in line with the mitigation hierarchy. There's part of it to, there's part of the stacking ecosystem service payments, which is, it's coming in the future at the minute. So if you can't use habitats on site, we'll be going through them, looking what can count for other things. And in the past, mitigation habitats, so say you had habitat for great crested newts or bat mitigation, couldn't be used in the metric, but they've changed that now, that mitigation, that habitat can be used, but only to reach net zero. So it can't be to reach anything above that on your gain. All the habitats need to be managed for at least 30 years. As we said before, that's part of the Environment Act, so that habitats are basically secured for the future. That's what we want. So a landscape and ecological management plan will need to be produced for those habitats, to use going forward. That's given to a management company to carry on. Cool. The information we require for the metrics, so it's really a great idea to get ecologists involved early, especially to go to site, look at your habitats that are on site, do that condition assessment, and consider biodiversity net gain within your design. For that, we usually need the red line boundary and then those conditions. So we go to site, look what's there, and assess the habitats, and that would include all habitats within the red line boundary. If there's any off-site habitats that potentially are in your land as well that we'd like to look at to potentially use off-site, we also need to do the same measures for that. So we would need to look at the condition assessment of those. And then post-development, so what's going to be on site, like landscape-wise, we'd need a high-level assessment. Is ideal if we can do that at an early stage, because then you know where you stand and what percentage you're at, and that will inform usually initial design. And once plans are finalised, it can you can kind of get your score from that. It will then include the management roles and responsibilities within the LEMP, and like I said, off-site habitat information if needed, if our score was under the 10% that we needed or below 0, if that off-site habitat is needed, if we can get that sort of like arranged early or at least considered, it just saves delays later on. So the biodiversity metrics is being designed, like we said, by Natural England. It uses a lot of it going forward. It's I think we've done this one. Yeah. We can skip this one.
We can move on to the next slide.
Sorry, moving on. So achieving biodiversity net gain on your site is very much, it does depend where you are, and as Stacey said earlier, there's also ways that are like Cambridgeshire's at a 20% net gain. A lot of councils are still writing it into local policy, so that's the LPA requirement might just be for net gain. Others are at the 10% or expecting that. So having early consultation sometimes with the council as well is ideal, and we try though to get to that mandatory 10% net gain just in case there's any delays, and then say the Environment Bill came in, we would need to achieve that 10%. Both habitats and linear features, like I said, hedgerows and watercourses also need to meet those requirements. The ecologist or suitably qualified person needs to complete the biodiversity metric, and then that is sent to the LPA, and also you include with that your justification for your habitat condition, so pre and post development, which would be kind of within an associated report. You want to plant or create habitats that are achievable on your site, and the LPA will be looking out for that. So if you've got an arable field and you want to turn it into acid grassland, like what, you know, how is that actually going to be achieved? Make sure we have achievable habitats on site. Then we complete the metric using that condition assessment. That's submitted and hopefully approved by the LPA, and then we produce a landscape and ecology management plan, which is usually controlled via a condition, and it's to the Biodiversity British Standard, so that's the for 2020. Natural England and DEFRA are looking at providing basically a standard template for those biodiversity net gain as part of their plan. It's just to help with consistency and remove the need for specialist input for every application, which will hopefully help going forward. Everyone will know where we stand with it. And the LEMP, the idea of it is also to monitor the habitats to ensure they successfully reach the target condition, and include remedial action if those habitats fail. So if they do fail, what are we going to do to, we're going to replicate it, are we going to plant something different going forward? So that's the LEMP, is that kind of security going forward.
So we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk through some case studies just to be able to put the biodiversity net gain metric into context. So we carry out many different metrics for different sites as we work across all sectors. And this is really an example of an urban site. It's you know, as you can see from the plan there, it's buildings and hard standing with a few trees. So the improvement in biodiversity in the built environment is key, and here the client wanted to approve amenity value as well as biodiversity. And of course the benefits are broader than just biodiversity. There's benefits for air quality in this urban environment. There's increases in shading and cooling, which, you know, we'd all appreciate right now. And there's obviously benefits for health and well-being for people using the location, as well as by creating ecological connectivity to other sites, because urban areas can be quite fragmented in ecology, and that's always of high value. So as you can see there, that was what we were presented with, and this is the final result. So there's quite a vast increase in green space, as you can see, and the recommendations that we were asked to look at there were for increases in implementation of green roofs, more nature-rich and wildlife-rich planting, and further hedgerows that were proposed. So in an urban environment, you're always looking for advances in green walls or extensive roofs and planting in trees. These give best benefits overall for biodiversity, but and for ecosystem service benefits, but also to help you maximise the score. And within this case study, there's over 100% percentage increase in the biodiversity habitat units and in the hedgerow units. And it's important to say here that the hedgerow, the linear features are calculated separately, as Sarah's mentioned previously. So that's good to note at this stage. With another case study, this is one that's located in Fenland, so just north of Cambridgeshire. North of Cambridge in Cambridgeshire, and the site here was it's improved grassland with some scattered trees present, and there's several enhancement options with a site like this, but obviously you need to choose wisely. So what we would always do, thinking about that mitigation hierarchy and thinking about, you know, our background in ecology, we would always look at what's in the surrounding area, what habitats are nearby, and in fact in this case it was close to a SAC, which is Wickham Fen, and so that's wetland habitats and reed bed habitats, and so it's thinking about what you can actually implement here that will benefit biodiversity overall, but also provide the maximum score for biodiversity net gain, because obviously if you don't achieve the 10% net gain, there are planning implications, but also financial implications. And for some clients, it can be the difference between, you know, the decision to acquire a site or not, or decision between a project to go ahead or not. So here in I think one of the values as an ecologist being involved at an early stage is they've done the desktop study, they've done the preliminary ecological appraisal, so they know the site well and can make the best recommendations when it comes to biodiversity net gain. So this is just to show a high-level landscape plan, but here some wetland features were recommended, and again just to be in keeping with the area, whether it's a triple SI and a natural nature reserve of Wickham Fen, as well as the SAC, part of a SAC, and you know, this gives other advantages as well. We're a multidisciplinary sustainability consultancy. We're always thinking about how other features will fit in. So here we're building flood resilience, and you know, we're also factoring in other things like carbon sequestration over time, and just thinking about wider benefits to biodiversity, as well as achieving a gain for the metric. So we added, no hedgerows here, so hedgerows have been added, and that's not always a requirement. You don't have to include hedgerows if there weren't any on site to start with, but so this gives you 100% net gain for hedgerows, and also a 41% gain for the habitats, and that's because wetland features do score quite well. It's a good way to enhance the site. So obviously just to highlight here that early involvement and thinking about designs for optimizing designs can really benefit. So, you know, where to put the building, where to put the habitat, what habitat to retain, what habitat to enhance, what habitat to create, as all the different parameters and all the different scenarios that result in the best outcome. So I don't know if you want to do this one, Sarah.
Yeah, sure thing. So as we said before, so it's always good to start with a high level, like approximate scenario as a design guide. Then if you do it early and early enough, we can then look at if the design can be changed to achieve a net, like your best or a net gain score. It may reduce financial implications later on, or do we look at offsite habitat now and start, you know, just start the process rolling early to see what you can achieve on site. If we have to redesign any of the scheme, can we change or increase any planting on the site? Can we retain or enhance any habitats, especially the ones of highest ecological importance? So that's kind of high level is key to do that to get us forward. If we have to look at off-site habitats, we also look at factor in the spatial risk multiplier. So the Biodiversity Net Gain approach embeds a fundamental principle for spatial hierarchy of habitat delivery, with a preference for on-site or local enhancements. So the metric does include a spatial risk multiplier, like box within our spreadsheet, which reduces the biodiversity value of habitats delivered further away from the development. Therefore, if you've got like a larger area of habitat, larger areas of habitat are required off-site to achieve a similar area on-site or closer to the site. So the further away you are, the larger area you need. But the mitigation hierarchy should always be applied. So on-site first, then look for like locally off-site. Looking at the off-site habitats, the development can secure the unit shortfalls by securing a bespoke site for net gain or an appropriate site of the local net gain habitat market from other landowners. So this site will also need to meet the criteria of the Biodiversity Gain Site Register, and there may be a local strategy which can be joined. So the options for all of the above, we can explore those options. And the off-site land used for Biodiversity Net Gain delivery will be secured for the length of like the net gain agreement. So that's either via a Section 106 or a conservation like covenants, so private voluntary legal agreement. This is some areas don't quite have this yet, others do. So it's more talking to the LPA to have a look at this, look at these options, explore them, and again, early involvement, high level approach to start with is key, so we can start that ball rolling. The local planning authority, so if we have to purchase any statutory biodiversity credits or anything like that, the LPA will calculate the appropriate biodiversity unit price for offsetting gain delivery on their land or land sold by them on behalf of a third party. And this cost will be sufficient for the creating or enhancing of the habitats that are there and the maintaining it for a minimum of 30 years. So that's with off-site solutions, that one is. But as a final resort, the developer can purchase statutory biodiversity credit from the government, and this process for this is coming out in the next Biodiversity Net Gain secondary legislation. So it's evolving as we speak. So as part of the Environment Act, they're bringing in a biodiversity gain plan, and this biodiversity gain plan, will cover quite a lot of things, as we've talked about already, and it will make it consistent across everybody doing biodiversity net gain. It will show how adverse impacts on the habitat are being minimised on the site, the post-development biodiversity value of the on-site habitats, so what you're putting in on site, the pre-development biodiversity value of the on-site habitats, so it's kind of that condition assessment that we said about earlier, why we've justified the habitats that are there and their condition, the value of any off-site habitats provided in relation to the development, any statutory biodiversity credits that are being purchased, and any further requirements that might be set out in this secondary legislation. The planning application subject to this mandatory biodiversity net gain will be required, so it will need this biodiversity gain plan for planning authority approval. As I say, it's not quite in yet, but it's expected to be coming in the forthcoming second stage consultation, which is through DEFRA and Natural England. So I think to get optimisation on your site, early involvement, as we've said all along, a high level approach to start with if we can. So design it to avoid your habitat loss, because they are your highest ones. Which are your most valuable habitats? Can we keep them, or can we enhance them on site? Run through the scenarios. So there's a lot of different habitats that can be placed back on site. Can we what can we use for those? What ones will give, what's achievable and give us the highest value? If we can keep hedgerows, woodlands, ponds, they're the habitats that take quite a while to recreate. So they have a higher score within the metric, and they're important for our wildlife and biodiversity. So understand then the most appropriate habitats for the site for the best gain for biodiversity and for our metric score, but make sure they're achievable on site, especially achievable going forward with the management as well and any remedial action. Small variations on the metric we can run through a few scenarios can actually have quite a big impact depending on those habitats you're putting in. So not all habitats have that same value. So grasslands, there's lots of different types, like brownfield sites. There's different habitats that are there. Wetlands, what can we put in? Scrub is a word that people sometimes don't like, but it's not always bramble, it's other species as well. And that's really good, especially if it's native for wildlife and biodiversity. And it can incorporate quite well into schemes if we can get it. If your habitats are impacted, you can enhance habitats as well. So if there's grassland on the site, actually we can enhance it quite easily with a bit of management and seeding to actually achieve probably a better result than anything just seeded and thrown on the ground. If we can design multifunctional green spaces, they are really great. They will count as well within the metric, so it's not, this double counting doesn't occur for multifunctional green spaces unless it's for like grey crescent mitigation. And if we can make those spaces like accessible for people, leisure, nature, then it will have benefits for everyone and biodiversity, which would be great.
Okay, so just thinking about the opportunities of biodiversity net gain, we've touched on some of them already, but the opportunities really are to take a site, ensure it is a measurable gain for biodiversity, and then think about this as part of a larger ecosystem and a larger landscape scale project. So if it's part of a larger restoration project, then it obviously has broader, wider benefits, especially we're thinking about climate resilience, and this is beneficial in this area. So those ecosystem service benefits from an improving biodiversity can be carbon sequestration. So we are frequently seeing that right now with planting additional trees. We're also thinking about nutrient neutrality, which may be something that you've come across most recently as Natural England introduced that in new areas across the country, so that we're making sure that any developments are neutral for and don't actually result in an increased amount of nutrients running off from the development site into our watercourses. So actually thinking about how you maximise a site for biodiversity can also improve that. We might have additional habitats that can filter nutrients, and thinking about using actual sustainable urban drainage features. So any in an urban area, we could have swales or all sorts of other features, like there's a suite of features we can use to benefit there, and that leads on to flood alleviation really. So it's thinking quite carefully about what's already in the local area, what you can do to improve the ecology, and also what you can do to improve the benefits for wider ecosystems. And we've just talked about ESG reporting here because we know that investors increasingly are asking for sustainable design and sustainable features, and I've worked in this area for many years, and it used to be ecologists and sustainability professionals that were knocking at the door and always pushing forward this agenda. But actually we're seeing a change. We're seeing a change in direction, and we're seeing investors asking about sustainability and asking about biodiversity. So we know that some of our clients are are thinking about this within their ESG reports, and they're thinking about the risk of their portfolio and on biodiversity. And so biodiversity is moving up the agenda in that sense, and it's becoming more part of the strategy and the reporting. So there's opportunities there to use a metric, use a net gain metric to bring that into today's conversation. And so really, in summary, we just wanted to summarise a real key points. So think about getting an ecologist involved early, and think about the high level biodiversity net gain assessment to optimise. So what we often do is we'll use high level information. We might not have the detailed landscape plans or the detailed design to be able to carry out the full calculation, the full metric, but we can give you a good overview. So even as early as acquisition of sites, we can think, okay, do a desk study and think, what will this look like? What if you've got a standard development, how will that play out? Because obviously the financial contributions can be quite quite high and quite substantive. So it really comes down to collaborating with the team, talking to the landscape architects, talking to the developers, talking to the architects, and making sure that every consideration and scenario is thought through. And then as we go through the design phase, we can amend and change the report ready to have the most accurate report at planning. And so really the second point there is the ecologist should know the site. So they know the site, they know the area, and they know the metric, and that will gain you the best results for biodiversity and maximise the score, because they know all the details to achieve that. And of course, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's fairly straightforward, and we're here to help you do that, of course. And I just really wanted to end the presentation today with just thinking about the future and thinking about biodiversity metrics more broadly. So we know that biodiversity metrics are evolving right now, and they present a huge challenge. Actually, it's taken us a number of years to get to this point where we've got biodiversity net gain, and there's been professionals within the sector campaigning and working to get to this point. And really, we're thinking about the future and what that means. We know that some of our biggest companies within the UK are already been asking to report on the climate-related financial disclosures, and that how the material financial impacts of climate change appear within their annual reports. And we know that's already happening. But climate is really broader. It does include biodiversity, and I think we all are aware now of the reasons why biodiversity is important. It's fundamental for life. It affects many different ecosystems and functions throughout our lives. And so we know that the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD, is moving up the agenda, and it is following closely behind TCFD. And the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures recently released their agenda on biodiversity metrics, and there's obviously operates at a higher scale and a higher level than biodiversity net gain, which is very much on the ground and project by project. But I think there's challenges there about how we choose the best metrics to report on biodiversity. It is difficult, but it's hard to record biodiversity for one. And how do we think about that into the future? We've got expertise actually on the ground. How do we make sure that that information isn't lost and it's fed through to the broader scale? So when we're making these larger decisions and we're considering biodiversity, that it's accounted for and it's considered well. So I just wanted to talk about that because I see this really interesting, fascinating part of the future of biodiversity. And if you want to discuss that in more detail or know more, I'm happy to come and talk about it and do a CPD or whatever you think is relevant, but just please let me know. So I will see if there are any questions in our chat function and we can answer those. Zena, are there? But if you've got any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat function now, or get in touch with Sarah or I in a future time. We'd be more than happy to answer them. That brings us to a close, I think. Oh, hang on, we might have one question. So the question is, what are the implications for projects where land is leased rather than owned? What considerations are there when a project is sold before the 30 years?
I think there needs to be some security with whatever land it is, and therefore the metrics. So there's security for that land management, and whether that's through any legal things on the planning side, wouldn't it, going forward? Yeah. And it all needs to be agreed with relevant parties involved. So whoever, so the owner of the land and whoever leases it, you all need to be kind of in agreement with that. And yeah, it's the passing on of that, and it's secured. That's going to be the key. Yeah, these are contractual agreements that will span the 30 years, and that's a requirement of the Environment Act and Net Gain. Thank you. Have another question. Could you expand on using BNG as part of a net zero strategy? Well, sure. And obviously we're all thinking about net zero carbon and how we achieve that. But I think biodiversity is broad. Net zero carbon is broader than just carbon, and sustainability is broader than just carbon. And we should include biodiversity within that. So obviously, we undertake carbon footprinting assessments, and also as part of our certification body, Natural Carbon Solutions, we're designing premium offsetting schemes. So once you've worked through the process of achieving net zero and you've reduced, and then you're at the stage of you do need to offset, you can offset with a scheme that's absolutely has many core benefits, and biodiversity being a huge core benefit, so that you're not just offsetting without considering that's got to be a part of it. I'm hoping that's answered the question there, but please do let me know if there's anything I can add. Okay, well, I think that draws our session to a close. If there's anything else, please do get in touch in the future, but thank you for attending and thank you for your time today.